Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Of course, we answer your questions 7 days a week. And if you have a question, of course, you can use Mukana. You can ask those questions. You can vote those questions up. You can chat about those questions in Mukana. If you're not in Mukana, don't worry. You can go to askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global. Just throw your question in there, and the next day or two, we will throw it in. Just make sure that it's well-formed. It's technical in nature. So throw those in there, and we will get to them as fast as we can. Let's go ahead and start with those questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Douglas Carmichael this morning, and Douglas wonders, Universal Audio has introduced the Apollo X16D, which brings UAD plugins into the Dante world. With devices like this, where do you see Waves SoundGrid's place as the live plugin king? And he's got a link there to the UA Audio website.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends. I mean, one thing to just bear in mind is that the Waves grid and Wave servers, Wave plugins, this is like kind of the beginning mobile architecture for live sound, right? So at the very beginning, that's all that you have. A lot of other companies are coming out with lots of other options, and obviously as those things expand, people have the option to grow if they want. For me, I have plugins. I've got Wave plugins I use that are incredibly old, that are just part of my workflow because they do the job I need. I'm not looking for another thing to do that. So I think it just depends in what people are needing. I mean, the UAD architecture is also like 15 years old. So the Shark DSP chips, this is, they're really, really strapped to that architecture. Everything that they do is based off of these chips. And they've gone native with those, and so a lot of people are kind of hemming and hawing because a lot of folks invested in this. But if you look at it, actually these DSP loaded boxes are incredibly useful in a lot of applications just because of the amount of power that they can take, and really just divert from the computer having to do that processing. So I think it just depends on what the thing is and who the person is and what plugins are doing what job, because if it's done, it's done. So.
Go ahead, Marty.
While these processors are essential for low latency performance in live production, you can use processors on a PC, but doing that is not necessarily low latency, and you want to have a dedicated PC to do that with. So these dedicated processors are a way to do that. One of the issues, and they work really well, but one of the issues that I have is that each one of these, they're proprietary to that company's plugins. I'm looking forward to when somebody comes out with a processor that can host VSTs and UADs and Waves plugins as well, and be more universal.
Next question.
Gene J. Anthony in Skokie, Illinois, up next. Yesterday at the RNC convention, they played the Foo Fighters, Learning to Fly, and Gin Blossoms Follow You Down, and songs by many other bands like Jacob Dylan that are hard to license to these events. How do they do that, and how do we license them for us?
Courtney?
Well, a lot of times, believe it or not, politicians don't know much about the law for some reason, especially copyright law. And they tend to just steal stuff and play it anyway, figuring, hey, it's a political campaign. We have money. We can pay for the license later if we use it. And a lot of artists end up suing politicians if they happen to have a differing political point of view, because this has happened many times. You can license music legally, but if you're doing it for a political campaign, you may find it a little tougher because artists have their own political agendas and beliefs, and they may not be willing to license it for any amount of money. So just take that into account. Talk to ASCAP.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think it just really depends. Obviously, yeah, I mean, political views are going to probably be a huge aspect there in what's played and what's not. And you really don't want to play stuff without permission, because you're really liable to be in these fines. I mean, you can get hit very, very severely with these things, and it's just not really a game you want to play. But there is a lack of information, like Courtney said, and that's a real thing. But a lot of these other situations is like, artists want their stuff being used. So it just really, really depends. Obviously, the political aspect, if someone is out there completely against what you're believing in, you might not want your song going in there. But some people, you don't know who is believing what, and you don't know exactly what, where people are standing, and sometimes, people are doing what they can because it's paying bills. So,
Go ahead, Bill.
And also remember, we're talking right now about U.S. law in the U.S. That's covered under Title 17 of the U.S. Code that covers copyright and things like this. There is a section in there about what is called a compulsory license, and some of these people are probably relying on that. That means that you can sometimes do these things if you pay the royalties required of the existing thing. But as Courtney and Chris both alluded, that doesn't mean that the actual holder of the copyright can't come back at you and say, no, you needed specific permission to use this, and we don't like what you did with it, and so we will try to strike you for that. But just it's really useful to know something about Title 17 and copyright law. Stanford University has a whole site about copyright law that's really easy to read, and I would highly suggest anybody who's going to get into one of these situations where you want to license something that's in the public overview, a big song, that'll help you learn the rules, but it's still you can get sued by anyone. And as Alex has mentioned a number of times, there are groups like the Eagles who, you hum their tune and you're going to get a notice. Please don't do that or we will sue your pants off you. So it's a thicket.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, you're really taking a gamble when you're using licensed material and not paying for it in advance because, there isn't really we'll pay for it later. It's not a royalty. It's then a fine. You're violating copyright law, and artists have sued political conventions for doing that.
Many times, whether it's the case or not, a lot of this is covered under BMI and ASCAP. So there is, oftentimes a different of opinion about what you can and can't do with that. So I think a lot of times the assumption is that these are all covered under BMI and ASCAP, and oftentimes they are. And sometimes the artists just publicly tell the politicians to stop using our stuff because they don't have a way to sue them, like they because of how it's being used. So it just really depends on it. But ASCAP and BMI is the first place for you to look if you want to use something for your event. But if you're doing a commercial event, you will need to license it. It's not covered under ASCAP and BMI typically under a commercial license. A lot of modern companies have chosen for a lot of their events to just hire a composer to build 10 or 12 tracks they're going to use for their streams and for their events, walk-ins and, ambient music that sounds very like something, but not exactly like it. And that is what they use for a year, and then they just do it again. And it's less expensive than doing the licensing. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Tech giants Apple, Anthropic, Nvidia, and Salesforce used content from over 170,000 YouTube videos to train their AI models without creator consent. Nonprofit EleutherAI, it looks like EleutherAI, EleutherAI, compiled the data as part of a larger collection called The Pile. Comment?
Courtney?
Well, I always wondered about this, and it still has not, I don't think it has come to a conclusion in the courts yet as to whether stuff that is available to view on the internet is able to be added to a training pile for training AI or not, because they're not copying and reproducing the original material, which would come under copyright law if you're reproducing that individual material. But if you're just looking at it to train something, it's just like an artist who goes to the museum and studies all the famous painters, Renaissance painters, to develop his own style. It's you can't outlaw that. That's why things are made public or exhibited in the public, even if they're copyrighted. So there's a lot of political fallout from this. There's a lot of bad publicity from this. And so a lot of the bigger companies are trying to cover themselves by only obtaining licenses for all the material that they add into their training database. But the problem with that is it kind of dilutes the database to the point that then you only have stuff, points of view, and language in that training database that comes from a certain type of people or person. And if you're training, or for example, if you're just using public domain information, this is old stuff, historical stuff, that may be a combination of history and legend, which is now not under copyright. And so you get the result is that when you ask the AI a question, it can come up with an answer. Will it be accurate? Will it be historical? Or will it be part of the legend? You really don't know. And this all has to be, I don't know if it has to be worked out in the court. I think they'll come to some amenable situation in the future to advance the technology to where it's most useful for everybody and less contentious for legal reasons.
Good guy.
Yeah, in the New York Times, there was a podcast episode. It's free behind the pay. You don't have to pay and subscribe and all that. But take a listen. I put it in the chat. It's called AI's Original Sin, and they talk about how OpenAI violated the copyright law that Google had put up to not scrape the YouTube videos. They totally scraped hundreds of thousands of hours. And the thing is, they can't go back. And Google's not suing them because Google did the same thing. Google did the same exact thing, used YouTube data. And so it's here in the New York Times article. So now that everybody's found this tool so valuable, it's hard. You can't go back. And so it is what it is. All that original data is what we've found super useful. So we're probably going to see more of this because nobody wants to sue because it's valuable. People are using this in their daily lives.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of suits that are floating around about copyright, and they are going to want both sides to some degree want the government, want the Supreme Court specifically to come down on one side or the other. So the lawsuits are coming up. The reality is that there's probably the folks that are doing AI want that to be sorted out as well. A lot of people are standing on the sideline because they're not sure how this is going to turn out. So everyone, there's probably $1 trillion that are just sitting there waiting to find out how this all turns out. And as soon as the Supreme Court makes a decision, and most likely the Supreme Court's going to rule against the copyright holders. Those are the odds. So most likely they're not going to win. And as soon as they don't win, you haven't seen anything yet. This is there's so much money waiting to come into this. As soon as they know that they're not legally bound by it. But right now, because people don't know how it's going to turn out, the current Supreme Court might be probably would not. I don't even know if they'd hear it if it was coming to them. If it was already shot down. But you never know who's going to be in the Supreme Court when the case actually arrives, which could be 3 to 5 years from now. So everyone's sitting on the side, kind of waiting and watching to see how this goes. It's still going to take a long time, and the problem is that 3 years from now and 5 years from now, half of the United States is going to be using it every day. And it's just going to be very hard to say, well, we're actually going to pull this pin back. And so that's, I think, and a lot of the stuff has been open sourced. And the reason they open sourced it is because there's just no way to stop it. So by doing a lot of the open sourcing that was done related to this, it becomes very, very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. And so that has been definitely a tactical approach to doing this, is to make sure that there's just no way to put the genie back in the bottle. And I think that regardless of the law, the argument's going to be also that all you can do is fall behind China and Russia and everybody else who's not going to do any of those things. So I think that it's a really big uphill battle for them to win that one. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Mariella Zushimera in Webelow. How are you handling your Dante licenses on your clean system builds and scripting or automation apps? And it's a QR code from this morning.
It's interesting. I actually realized I don't think I have a machine that has been rebuilt since I put the Dante license on it. I have a lot of machines with a lot of DVS on them. But I realized I was trying to think about it, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know how that works. There's a couple different ways of managing that. Mickey says I have a DVS license assigned to each machine, and I think that it'll pass through it. When you do a clean reinstall, I'm not actually 100% sure what happens there. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I kind of went through something similar to this. DVS licenses are assigned to a particular machine, and you cannot migrate them unless you buy a migrating license. So you can get a migrating license where you can change machines, and it's a higher subscription.
But I think the
fee. Question
is that if you rebuild the machine from the ground up, uninstall it, put a whole new let's say you're going to go to the new operating system. Is it using the MAC address? What is it using as the ID for that Dante license?
So it assigns an ID number to the machine within Dante. And so I had a machine where was using an older version of the DVS, and they had updated it for higher security, and everybody needed to reinstall it. Well, you want to install over the old one, not uninstall it and reinstall it, because without an active license on the machine, it'll think it's a new machine.
Well, and Mickey said that the same serial number will authenticate no problem with the same hardware. He says hardware ID is based on the motherboard and the logic board. So it's pretty tightly wound to that. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to note that I think we've been using DVS as kind of a common term. I believe you're talking about the Dante Virtual Sound Card, and that's just for people who are relatively new. Getting used to these initialisms and things like that is a big part of this world now.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. If a band requires a specific mixer that a venue does not own, who pays for it to be rented and installed? Further, how has Dante changed this swapping out if Dante is run to the stage boxes? And finally, can Alan Heath's dSNAKE cables be used for Dante?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it really, really just depends. There's a giant spectrum here. And so it really depends on who the artist is, what the venue is, and right. In most situations, touring artists are actually carrying their own consoles and like fully contained systems with them, right? So they've got in-ear monitors, they might have a little front of house console. They may just be traveling with in-ears and just essentially that brain, and everyone's doing their own in-ears in their phones, essentially just cell phone apps. And that would be like a lower level band, obviously, who's in a van and just doing tours. If you're a much larger artist, it really, really depends. I mean, because if you're playing, anybody who's playing like an arena, something like, they are bringing everything. Okay. They just have all that stuff. It's all that stuff's been sussed out like months and months and months way before the tour even started. So, it just really, really depends. Frequently, like if you're hiring a band to come in and they're going to play your place, right? And they're saying, hey, I just have to have all this. I'm assuming that's more what this question is. If you have to supply that, right, the venue may have to rent that for them, and that would just come out of show costs. But it just depends, because there's a million different kinds of deals that venues make with bands. It's not a uniform thing. There are splits, there are door deals, there are guarantees. It really, really depends. So.
And Mickey said that fulfilling the riders is on the event organizers and followed by the production house. He says if repatching the inputs is done during changeovers, this is usually done in the analog realm. Absolutely, like we try to really stay away from that. There's a thing called a clock.
Yeah, it can be a complete mess, and switching. It's not necessarily like a snap of the fingers because people are using Dante.
Yeah, and Mickey said that dSNAKE is proprietary and does not use Dante, but you can place a Dante card in them, but patching is required internally. The other thing is that what we find is that little bands are just happy to be there. They show up and they're just like, yeah, we got some, I have some DIs. Can I use this and everything else? And then we find that the big bands, they have a rider. They have generally all their gear, just as Chris said. It's the ones in the middle that we have the hardest, because they've got their friend who been their mixer for the last 5 years, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, but he knows how the band likes it, and he's got all these quirky, weird things that he wants to do with the mixer. And we're always just like, okay, how do we fit this in? So, but we find that the little bands are easy, big bands are easy, medium bands, So go ahead, Marty.
But Alan Heath does have a stage box that is a Dante I/O unit, and so my understanding is that it works with any other Dante piece of equipment because it's Dante in and out.
Yeah, I have to admit, at live events, most of the time, we've really not tried to have two systems talking on Dante or Matty. If we have to have them talking, we're finding an analog solution for that just because of the clocking issues that we run into. I once delayed a very large show for 20 minutes because of clocks. Next question.
Ignacio Madera in Madrid says, sound was distorted on the last Extra Hours episode. What was the problem?
Yeah, I'll answer this one because I think I have a little information there. There was a connection. There was just a connection speed problem between the head end and the cloud, and that's what caused that. And experimenting in a whole new world on Mondays. So when you watch Mondays, you're gonna kind of like, we had all kinds of things happen on the first couple of times we did office hours, and this has turned into a regular thing there. But we almost canceled Monday and then decided to, it was offered to do it, and so we went ahead and did it. So it was, but that was the issue there, because I think when we do the other ones, they've all been 100% in the cloud, which was a little different. So we'll, we're continuing to learn, and it's just such a great team working on the cloud process right now. So you're going to see us slowly evolve, and that show over the next 3 to 6 months will get a lot cleaner and a lot better. Next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. Up next, I work in a house of worship that can become extraordinarily hot. I am looking for some powerful, yet as quiet as possible fans to keep the talent, tech booth, and audience as cool as possible. I've checked out Home Depot and Walmart so far. Any ideas?
Chris?
All right. I'm so sorry, but the answer is kind of no. So the real thing here is that silent HVAC systems, okay, when someone's installing that in a real place and they're like, hey, a lot of people are going to be in here, we need to really keep this temperature controlled and make people comfortable. Or also hey, we've got a really old, antique piano that also needs to be humidity controlled and temperature controlled, things like that. That's the most expensive thing ever, right? So the quieter things get, the more astronomical they become in cost. And there's fans, you can look at Dyson fans, maybe things like that, which are definitely quieter, but none of this stuff is that quiet. And the real thing is, once it's blowing into a microphone, if you have a microphone, try blowing into it and you'll hear, that's the sound you're going to get. So you're going to get that all over the place. So wind noise, and I know this very much from running Lincoln Hall for the past 15 years, is we had a very, very strong HVAC system there with two blasts essentially right at the front of the stage. And audience mics would sometimes get hit with wind noise, and it literally is just... So if you have that, all of a sudden you're surrounding your stage in that, it's going to bleed into all these microphones. Furthermore, if it's a house of worship, you're probably using a not the greatest omni lav, because churches love to use lavs. Those are omnidirectional. They're taking in sound from everywhere. So a fan blowing at that it could be really, really unusable pretty quickly. And it's a tough spot. Heat is no fun, but fans are just loud, and so it's a tough spot.
Good, Courtney.
Well, fans don't necessarily have to be loud. There are such things as high volume, low velocity fans, which the larger the fan blade, the slower it can turn to move the same amount of air. There are these extremely large industrial ceiling fans that you can get and put up in the ceiling. To move. They're very quiet because they don't move very fast, so they don't disturb the air to the point that they generate a lot of noise, but they move a large amount of volume because of the length of the blades and how they can move the air. But the problem is, if you have a house of worship, usually it depends. A lot of houses of worship have vaulted ceilings, just as in their architectural design, and so heat tends to gather up there in the ceiling. And if you put a ceiling fan up there to move a large volume of air down to circulate the air and get it, at least have a little bit of a cool breeze hitting the people with one of these large fans, you're going to be pulling that hot air down onto the people. So you'd be better off with installing a exhaust fan up near the top of the ceiling to suck the hot air out, and then open up some ports or some windows, some area where it can suck cooler air in from the outside, as long as the outside air is cooler than the inside air. So that's one solution. There are also, in the studio world, there are air conditioners that are designed for studios that are mounted outside and have very high volume, slow velocity air movers that can push all that cool air into the area and exhaust all the hot air from up in the roof and be quiet enough to actually shoot motion pictures on the sound stages. So they are quite expensive, though. So there's no cheap way around it to get a large volumes, low velocity air handlers.
Good guy.
Yeah, I consult with an expert on this stuff because I've had friends that have been installers, and some of the technology is pretty amazing, and it is a lot of math. But the quote that I got for residents that I had was for a mini split, and these are popular because they're not really loud except for outside. So you get this unit that gets mounted on the wall inside, and this is just out of the local Home Depot. You can see that there's a variety of different prices, but the unit that goes on the wall looks like this, and then the outdoor unit looks more like this. So it's as low as $2,300, but this is for like a small home. So depending on if you're just doing a booth or a room, this might be the way to go with a mini split. But then remember, that's just the price of the unit. The install is where they're going to get you. So the quote that I got for our 3,500 square foot residence was $18,000. So it adds up pretty quick.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, even with a mini split, the inside unit has a high velocity fan to it and vanes in the register. And, like a water hose, if you have an open water hose, it's going to pour out. But if you put a nozzle on it and restrict the flow, it's going to shoot farther. And so that's what a lot of these fans and fan units are doing with the registers that are in the wall, is they're restricting the air so that it can shoot air farther out. That creates noise anytime you have that kind of turbulence. So what Courtney was referring to is high velocity, and this is what we do in recording studios. We have these massive air conditioning units that are on vibration dampers in another part of the building, massive ductwork for the supply, the very large ductwork, so that you can move a lot of air very slowly. The slower you move it, the more turbulence, but you're getting the same amount of air into the room, and then you have to have a way of returning that amount of air back to the air conditioning unit. This is how you do quiet studios and keep them cool. In a house of worship, that's a lot of expense to do, and so they tend to put in more standard air conditioning units. And you can put in larger, you can upgrade your ductwork, and you can put in the right registers that don't have closely spaced vanes, and that will quiet them down. But, just to put a fan in, moving hot air around will help a little bit, but it's still hot air.
Good, Bill.
So I had to deal with this in every voice booth I've ever put into some place, and it's complicated. If you have an open microphone and you need to keep somebody cool, even in a small space like that, let alone a large space like a church, you end up with doing a lot of engineering. People have talked about this before, but you'd be surprised, even on a 4x4 or 4x6 or 6x6 voice booth, there will usually be a series of built baffles where the air comes in one side, there are a bunch of little walls inside, the air meanders through and then comes out. All of that is to try to suppress noise going through the system. I've had, as Guy said, mini splits in most of those places. It's great to move the compressor outside so you don't get that noise. But the engineering of quiet air handling systems is precise, and it's not for the faint of heart. You can learn some of the basic things, but the bigger the thing, the area is, like a house of worship, it's going to take some serious engineering.
And I think it really just depends on how big your house of worship is. I've been in some that hold 50 people, some that hold 500, some that hold 5,000. So the math of what you're going to do and what you need to do is very different based on the size. So mini split might work for a congregation of up to maybe 50 or 100. After that, you're really talking about more industrial solutions. For events, when we go into a venue, a lot of times we're bringing industrial portable AC units that usually measure in the 30 to 50,000 BTU per unit. And then the number of units that we use depend on. We've had ones where we've had maybe 10 of them going down the side of the facility, and they sit outside. They're these huge AC units, and we just run tubing into the system. That way, all the sound stays outside and all the cold air goes inside, and we can flush that system pretty effectively. We tend to use twice as much as whatever someone told us we should use. So we have someone come in and say that'll take 50,000 BTUs, and we're like, okay, we need 100,000 BTUs. So because the other thing to remember is that what it takes to cool a space when it's empty is different than what it takes to cool a space when it's full. So you have to kind of think through the human interaction as well. So think about those things. The bare bones is what was talked about before as well. Vent out of the top, bring in at the bottom. So you're bringing cool air in, you're getting the hot air out. And so a lot of houses where I live, in fact, my house has big venting fans that were built into the house. You just turn them on and they start sucking all the hot air out of the house. The other thing to think about is using time to your favor. So at night, if it's, I don't know what it's like in New York, in where I live, it's 55 degrees every night, so almost every night. And so what you can do is flush a lot of cold air in at night to get that temperature down, and then try to get through it. So it just depends on what your budget is and how many people and how big the space is. And so if you give us more details, we might be able to be more accurate. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Up next, audio. Do you have any favorite training videos that teach mixing?
Marty?
So the link that Roscoe provided is for one of Drew Brashler's training videos. Drew has been producing these training videos specifically for the X32 platform for years, and he's very good at it. And you can learn the X32 from him and all the ins and outs. And he also provides a number of really good techniques for recording many different things and how to use the tools that are in the X32, and they're very valuable and they're very good. But in association with, there are many other people that are producing training videos for various mixing things. I find that I learned sometimes a lot more effectively by reading people's writings and white papers and texts and guides and things. And some of the places that I have found, the websites that I have found really valuable are ProSound Web, Pro Tools Expert, Lewitt.com from Lewitt Microphones produces a lot of videos and trainings, Church Sound University, PracticalShow.tech, PracticalMusicProduction.com. Those are some of the things that I've learned a lot from.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I would say just absolutely Mix with the Masters and PureMix.com. Those two, I mean, from the things that I've seen, that's kind of the unparalleled production platforms for mixing, where it is the greatest engineers in the world that are just sitting here and they're going through their set, whatever, Pharrell, whatever thing it is that you want to see, whoever mixed that band is up there talking about how they did that song you love all the way from beginning to end. And it's so informative. Everyone works so differently. It's,
I watched a premiere. I guess they do YouTube premieres with Mix with the Masters every once in a while. And on a Sunday morning, I just turned it on and it was there, and I couldn't stop watching. They were mixing an one of the Adele tunes, and I was just sitting there just watching it, and how he, and I think from an ear training and an art training of understand, it's not like you're going to run, he's sitting on a Neve. I'm not going to have a Neve in my house anytime soon, but sitting there and watching how he's thinking about those things, and he ended up, it was funny, in the middle of it, he said, I think this is a better mix than what we did originally. He gave you, he was going before, after, and you could tell he had brought out more bass, and he said it's a different room that he was mixing in for the training, which was better than the room that he was mixing in when he did it originally, and he heard something different. And so the Mix with the Masters is an amazing one, but it also depends on what kind of mixing you're talking about. So those training videos, that's a studio mix, but what about, corporate mixes or concert mixes? And
there's a myriad, there's a giant spectrum of different applications.
And nothing will replace doing it. Getting out there, trying to find places of all different sizes, trying to figure out. And a lot of times you're going to be an A2 running cables for a while, watching an A1 do what they know how to do. that's part of the process. It's an important part of the process. People are like, let me on the mixer, and like, maybe not. Maybe that's
you
not.
don't know how to wrap a cable.
Yeah, I think we were not going to give you the scalpel just yet. So, so I think that learning how, like, I taught my kids how to roll cables when they were 10, and now they're really happy that they know how to do it. So I'm happy that they know how to do it. I'm like, hey, roll all these cables here. So, but I felt like that's like reading, writing, arithmetic, and rolling cables is some of the basics that all kids should know. Yeah. And but I think that learning, a lot of people, when you look at a broadcast truck and you look at someone who TDs a broadcast truck, almost all of them ran cables for a couple years. It's just like
20 years.
Yeah, it takes time. I mean, it's just because you're learning the culture, you're listening to the conversations, you're coming up to speed on a lot of those things, and it's also why it's generational. We think about Nepo babies. They talk about that a lot. And 100 years ago, everyone was a Nepo baby. You did what your parents did. And it's because you were in the environment from the time you're born. And so, of course, you come up to speed faster, and so, but being in that conversation, being around it. But I think that a lot of people want to be the star immediately, or they want to immediately do those things. And playing an assistive role is part of it. And then, getting a little mixer that you can start to do little things with, and knowing that you're probably not going to get paid for the first 100 shows.
Also, no one wants the spotlight on them when everything's on fire. So
yeah, exactly.
that can happen.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, mixing is kind of a generic term, so it depends, in the words of Mickey McAchore. It depends on the type of mixing you're doing. If you're doing, music mixing, that's one level of mixing that's completely different from production mixing on motion pictures and television, which is completely different than post-production mixing on motion pictures and television. There's very little overlap. In fact, those two jobs, mixer on production is different than mixer on post-production. And they're in different unions, even. Post-production's in Local 700, production's in 695. So there's very little overlap between those two because the function is completely different. And the methods used and the equipment used. So pick your area of mixing that you want to specialize in, whether it's music mixing or live event mixing or, industrial production sound or industrial post-production sound. You can do both, but they're different equipment used and different type of methods used in creating that mixing. So find one that you're interested in, find some YouTube videos by good mixers in that field and watch those, and then apprentice some. Go out and watch somebody that you trust in the field and watch them do the job. And that's one of the best education.
And look for a place where, like, for instance, we did a soccer game a couple weeks ago, and the cost that we charged the client or the partner was food. just pay the crew, just feed the crew. And we had a nice dinner. We were able to talk about it and everything else. But outside of that, we just wanted to show up because the camera operators don't normally do camera operation. I don't usually do all the audio routing. We were testing some streaming. We were testing a bunch of different things. And, whatever we put up is going to be better than what was going to be done otherwise, and that's a great place to be. And then you're just trying to do the best you can and figure it out. And I look for those opportunities all the time. Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, there are studio engineers who would never even attempt to do a live show mix, because it's just a completely different thing. But I wanted to give shouts out to some of the engineers who have appeared here on Office Hours, like Robert Scoville and Michael Curtis, Bob McCarthy, and also Dave Ratt is another personality that produces some really, really good training videos.
Yeah, when you first see Dave Ratt start to talk about stuff, you're like, does this guy know anything? Like he's so low key, and then he starts talking, and you're like, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So he's really fun to watch.
Apprenticeships, like you were saying, are really, really important too.
Yeah. Next question.
Alton Christensen in New York City says, how might they be pulling this off? And he has a reference to the Olympic opening ceremonies video in IMAX at the Olympic site.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, you're dealing with a composited look at what's going on. I think in the past, Flames and Henrys and those kind of big end systems were probably in use for that kind of stuff. Now I would imagine it's all Unreal or something close to that because it's a composited look at what it should be like. It's an opening, that is created out of what you know is going to happen, but none of it is actually real because obviously this year's Olympics has no footage of anything except a bunch of architectural drawings of where they're going and how they're doing it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if he's talking about the transfer going to IMAX, most of these things are IMAX has a live network that can go out to hundreds of theaters live, and but that's a video network, so it's not DCP or film. So it's a function of getting the signal from Paris to the United States, which is something that NBC is doing a lot of, and then just finding a way to patch that signal to the live network. So that's basically that's the basic version of how that happens. But it does take a lot of testing and planning. Next question.
James Wilson in Palo Alto, California, looking for a longer lens to use with an FR7 for live events. Any experiences or suggestions?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, so the 28 to 135 kit lens is going to give you pan, tilt, and zoom with a servo. So that's the ticket is, do you need that servo zoom to be pushing in and out? Because if you don't need the servo zoom, then you can use a 200 millimeter. And with that, you could even use what's called the CineZoom. So inside a CineZoom, if you don't need 4K, you can have basically HD window mode where you can push in and you would have an extra 2x. So you could turn a 200 millimeter into a 400 millimeter. Now, if you need to go even more than that, you can go up to like a 600 millimeter, but now you lose the pan, the tilt, and you've only got your zoom coupled with CineZoom. So you're basically turning a pan tilt zoom camera into an FX6 or an FX9. So you may as well just get that camera for less money. And then if you still need more reach, last week we had 2 FR7s and 4 Venices with the Duvo, which is the 25 to 1000 PL mount Fujinon. So if you want to rent something for serious reach, this is the big bad boy right here, 25 to 1000, and that is a PL mount lens, and that even has a 1.5 expander on it. And you can this is for sports or we're doing concerts, so you can push right into an artist or somebody on stage. So those are a couple of your options. Yeah,
and we use FR7s often, and they really are best built for what you can. Of course, windowing, as Guy talked about, you can punch in 2x, so that's going to turn that 28 to 135 into a 56 to 270. So you're going to get a little bit more length there. But I will say that's what those cameras do well. And we build around that camera. So as soon as you start getting longer than that, there's a lot of options, in my opinion, that are better. Like if that's all you have, that's the hammer and everything's a nail. But where those cameras really shine, and they do shine, is inside of that 28 to 135 signal is where you're going to get the best performance out of them. Next question.
Harold Williams in Portsmouth, Virginia says, I caught the fireside chat with Colleen Henry when she spoke of multiple encodings of a video. It reminded me of when you mentioned you did multiple encodings of video shot with your camera. How can I do this at a live event?
So I think that I believe that what Colleen was talking about in the fireside chat was a ladder. So there's a ladder of multiple resolutions. And so what we do is we take that the first signal that comes in, which is generally uncompressed. So it reaches our encoder uncompressed, typically through baseband, when we're doing it at the level that she's talking about. So when we get that, and it can come through NDI, whatever it takes to get to the encoder. But now these encoders, and that encoder can be in the cloud, or that encoder can be an appliance, what we do is we take that and we break it into a series of it. And someone's got an open mic. I don't know who it is, but I'm hearing clicking. So the baseband comes in, and basically we have to create a stack of different resolutions. That's because we don't know what your connection is going to be on the other side. And so basically this is how HLS works. And so we build this stack up. And when you're watching YouTube, this is being done for you all the time. YouTube does it for you. So you RTMP or SRT into YouTube or HLS into YouTube, and then YouTube will build this ladder for you. But a lot of us, when we're doing really high-end events, have to build our own ladder. And that gives us a lot more control of how it's encoded and how it's all working there. And so basically we take we take that original signal, and we'll make let's say we're bringing in a 4K signal. We may have 1 or 2 ladder steps that are 4K, the high-end 4K, low-end 4K. Then we drop to one that's 1080. We might have a high-end and a low of 1080. Then we have 720. And once we get to 720, we don't, we know that you don't have a very good connection. so 720, then 540, then 360, then 240. Oftentimes there's a bunch of those steps that go down, and we start compressing those pretty heavily. A 720 might be up to 3 megs a second, but oftentimes we just make it 1.5 or 2 megs a second. And then the other ones are just there to make sure you see a signal. So what happens is all of those are encoded at the same time, and they all are being delivered. They're all being delivered to the network. And so all of those are being available. And what happens is those streams are all coming at the same time. The player on your end is looking at your bandwidth, how long it took it to download. Usually you'll notice that your encode starts a little low resolution and then pops to a higher resolution. That's because it's sending you something to get it to you very quickly, and then it's going to measure how long it took for you to get there, and then it's going to go, oh, I can grab a bigger version of this, and so then it goes and grabs a larger chunk of those, and so it's grabbed. But all those streams are available to it at the network. So to do those multiple encodings, you need either an appliance that will do it, or you can do it in AWS, or you can do it in some software. But it is pretty. Remember, you're doing anywhere from 3 to 8 or 9 different encodes on one computer, and scaling. The scaling turns out to be the big thing that hits the computer pretty hard. So you want to think about how powerful that machine needs to be. That's why the cloud oftentimes works really well, because you can make the computer as powerful as you need it to be, or Media Live will do that for you. But it also but if you're buying a computer to do that, it needs to be pretty beefy to make that work. And that's why Twitch is now using Nvidia. So Twitch is, if you have a beefy Nvidia card, they're letting you build that ladder so that they don't have to pay for it. So next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas is back with this one. SpaceX will now move its headquarters from Hawthorne, California to Starlink Plaza, Texas, along with X.com, formerly Twitter, 11 minutes for me. How will this affect the technical quality of their products and the Twitter stream?
Courtney.
Well, I don't know if it'll affect the technical quality of their products by any part of the imagination. Maybe. I think this is a political move, obviously, on behalf of Elon. And remember, he's moving the headquarters. I don't think he's moving manufacturing out of Fremont and Hawthorne. The products will still be manufactured probably in the same factories. He's just moving the corporate headquarters to Texas, where there's less taxes involved. There's no personal income tax from the state of Texas. So probably just for tax reasons, and maybe a few hundred people that are part of the corporate, or maybe 1,000 or more, but nothing like the people that are involved, employed in the manufacturing facilities, which will probably remain where they are. A corporate headquarters can be wherever Elon sleeps on the floor of the factory that night.
There you go. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Marty, you mentioned a live processing box, quote, that can host any VST. Have you ever had experience with transform.engine? And he's got a link to it.
Yeah, I've not experienced, no, but I was. Thank you for the lead. I was just looking at it. It can host any VST plugin, but it can't host Waves or Universal Audio plugins. But having that choice of VSTs is a big advantage. However, it's a $20,000 unit.
You can buy a lot of hardware for $20,000. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, back with this one. What audio gear are you not willing to put at the end of an extension cord, and what's your workaround?
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, as far as power is kind of the last thing that a lot of people think about, and it's really one of the most important things in your system, right? If you power everything is running optimally, and you have the full potential of all of your equipment together in unison, and just the outcomes overall better. So, I would say, as far as like extension cords, everything runs with extension cords in most situations. Every concert you've ever seen, every, studios, whatever, it might be wired internally through the wall, but at a certain point, I mean, copper is copper, right? So the best things that you can do, I have an Equitech, which is like my main power source that my whole studio plugs into. Clean power is crazy expensive, and boxes that sequence power and as well as surge protection and all that stuff, they can get costly. But you can get like 12 gauge extension cords if you're worried about it. Buy higher quality components. The parts are better, and they will just they'll facilitate. So I wouldn't really worry about it. Get quality stuff. Don't use cheap cords, and you're good.
Go, Courtney.
Yeah, like was said, it depends on the gauge of the extension cord and the length of the extension cord. You don't want to run an 18 gauge cord, 300 feet to your audio amplifiers that are driving, 3,000 watts of audio power out to the crowd. So the higher the current draw of whatever equipment you're putting at the end of that, you have to make sure that the cord that you extend it with can handle that amount of current. So check the current rating of the cord. Most, consumer-based like extension cords you'll get at Home Depot are only rated for 15 amps or 1,500 watts. In America. So you can buy heavier duty industrial strength extension cords, but they're very heavy. I've hauled them around. And especially if you're going to run power from a source to an area where you're going to have a bunch of outlet strips to distribute it over a desk where everybody's going to be plugging in all their equipment, mixers and amplifiers and everything else. Make sure that one extension cord that brings it from the source of the electricity to your location where you're going to be splitting it out is heavy duty, because that's going to be handling all the current for everybody plugged into it. And especially if you're going to be plugging in any lights to it. I never share power with anything the lighting department is using. I make them run separate extensions and even be on separate circuits and separate circuit breakers from anything that we're running any of the technical equipment on.
Good, Marty.
So I know a couple of outdoor venues. There's a golf course not far from here who does community free concerts on Fridays during the summer. They get some great bands. They get some great shows. People come out and enjoy it immensely. But it's away from the clubhouse, and they run a single extension cord to run all of the band's equipment, the PA system, the lighting, and it just is. Oh man, it sounds nasty when your equipment is starved for power. It just sounds really nasty. And also remember, even if you have a really thick 12 gauge, 10 gauge extension cord that you're plugging into an outlet in a house, that outlet is only rated for 15 amps to begin with. And so you've got to think about, well, what is your power consumption needs, right? And how much power are you running? How much power do you need? And then remember to add on a safety factor of at least 20% over what you think you're going to draw. And then make sure you're plugging into enough outlets to supply all of that power.
Go ahead, Chris.
And yeah, just very quickly, I would also just specify that like a lot of this audio stuff has the draw on it is tiny. It's really, really, really small. So I run my whole studio off pretty much a single 20 amp circuit that hits a power conditioner that then spans out to other Furmans and things of that nature. So my extension cords all have essentially Furman boxes on them built in anyways, but you can just you can get around things like that. So.
Yeah, and one of the other things that a lot of times when we're doing infrastructure with speakers, we've now gotten to the point where we try to just power the speakers and we send Dante to them. so we have, Audinate, like little, we just pop those in into the XLR inputs. And so we're not trying to send power through, we just don't want to send power, trying to send power through a cable to a speaker.
External like power amps that has draw, but everything else is
very light.
Tiny.
It's really the amps. The amps require the amps. Now, next question.
Next question comes to us from Nick Batt in Bath, England. What app can I use to capture ISO recordings via Thunderbolt /PCI, declink, etc. in Mac OS X?
Good guy.
So it depends on how many recordings and how many what codec that you want to utilize free. You could just use the Blackmagic Media Express app. There's also Wirecast at the higher end that has the ability to ISO, and then there's Mimo Live. If you use Mimo Live, keep an eye on your machine. If it is just a base Mac Mini or something, you'll want to keep an eye on your CPU utilization. But basically, inside of here, you have the ability to add a new file recording, and here you can choose which video. So if you did want to ISO a couple different feeds, you can do that. And then here you can also choose if you want something like ProRes, you can choose the codec to be ProRes 444, 422, and then the ones that might soak up your processor are the H.264 and HEVC. So be careful if you're doing multiple cameras or multiple inputs, whatever they are, graphics, animations, playback, that you do keep an eye on your CPU utilization, because you can't overtax a machine and it will stop your recording. So run lots and lots and lots of tests, or use hardware like a I have Protect or a Keypro or something.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of hardware, but also when we're recording a lot of them, a lot of feeds, and we need to use software, the Softron's movie recorder will record, I don't know how many it will record, but many at one time. And so I would definitely check out Softron. It's a little bit more expensive. I mean, this is not an inexpensive solution.
A little, it's a lot more expensive. What do you mean? It's like $1,800.
It's super effective. It just depends. So hardware is effective. One HyperDeck is whatever, $1,300. So or depending on what you're getting. So this one will record a lot more, and it's really just limited to your drive speed. Like it'll you can put a duo or a quad in there and definitely pull eight feeds. At a pretty high resolution. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas comes up next. He says, what would a custom AI be like which absorbed all office hours content over the last 4 years if consented to? YouTube videos, mukana links, and so forth, Discord and so forth.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I think it would compress down to, what is about 1,600? How many shows have we done? 1,600 times 2, so 3,000 hours worth of dialogue. And you compress it all down and eliminate the duplications, and most of it will just end up to be the word banana.
Good, Bill.
I don't know the real answer to this. All I know is whatever AI that is, the one thing it would be impossible to do is successfully sing happy birthday to anyone.
But it would do it just as badly. It would just hallucinate all the way through. Yeah, exactly.
Embrace the suck would be the history of happy birthday singing.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. To play back a video from an editing system into Zoom, I'm going from a mixer to the MixPre with a TRS cable. Should that cable be mono or stereo?
Well, most of the TRS cable, typically it depends on what you're doing, and it depends on what MixPre you're going into. But generally, most of your cables are going to be mono balanced, is what you're looking for. So they may look like a stereo out. The TRS cable may look like a stereo, but that's hopefully a balanced a cable that you're going into, and each cable is going to be your right or your left. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm wondering what editing system he's using, because some editing systems will allow you to just push NDI out right into Zoom. So I would just skip the MixPre if you can. But yeah, if you had to. That's an unbalanced connection, so be aware that if you can go line level through, depending on the distance, you can run a very short distance into the aux input. That's a 3.5 millimeter, but I'm doing that right now just because it is a short run, and even on a short run, I'm getting interference from have so much electrical stuff going on. So be aware that anytime that you use those 3.5 millimeter jacks, that you're going to be susceptible to noise.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and decoding TRS is tempering sleeve. This comes from the old nomenclature of phone companies, but the important thing is that gives you 3 signal pathways between the male and female parts of the plug, or however the thing is. If that's used in balanced, you need a positive and negative related to the ground, so that uses up the 3. If you're running a mono signal, you have some other things, and everything can be wired different. I mean, it's just 3 conductors, and the people designing the circuit and the equipment on each end of that circuit need to be aware of what they're trying to do in order for that whole system to be balanced or unbalanced or stereo or mono or whatever. So it's not just the fact that that's the connection, it's what you're doing with those things.
Yeah, and if there's any way for you to not use the 3.5 jack, I would recommend it. I would try to avoid that if you could. There's lots of ways of getting in and out of your computer and out of your mixer, and that's not the one that I would use if I had a choice. So just think about that because you are, especially if you're going to do a stereo out, you are going to be challenged with an unbalanced signal through a bunch of wires that are sitting on your desk. And that's usually not the greatest experience that you may have there. Nathan Moody is coming up here in just a minute here, and we're really excited to have him. Just some quick what's coming up next. Thursday, we'll be talking about shading with your ATEM. So what does that camera page mean? So we're going to talk through that. Look at the different options that you have to shade your own Blackmagic camera through the ATEM. We're also on Friday. We're going to talk about imperfect spaces. So I mean, a lot of us, we have dreams of what our studio, of what the spaces are that we're going to load into. It's going to have plenty of power in all the right places, and it's going to have internet. They're all going to have some kind of grid that we can connect to, a grid preferably that will lower and mechanically up and down. It'll have, and all that power will be there. There'll be great AC. Yeah, it's not usually what happens, though. So we're going to talk about how we figure this out and how we get through it and work in these spaces that are not what we really want. So we'll talk about that on Friday. On Saturday, of course, we have Q&A, and Sunday is introspection. It's usually talk around things a little bit. We're known to, chew on things a little bit longer, philosophical things. So if you have questions about office hours, if you have concerns about office hours, if you have complaints about office hours, ideas about office hours, that's what Sundays are for. So join us on Sunday for those. A reminder for the panelists that we have a panelist meeting on Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And please join us. So I met Nathan